I'm not sorry. I'll do it again and if I have to.
What did you say?
The smoke still clung to her clothes when the police slammed her against the hood of their vehicle. Urenna's wrists burned as the metal cuffs bit into her skin, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on the orange glow in the distance, flames licking the night sky where her house once stood. Someone in the gathering crowd was crying. A woman's voice, shrill and hysterical, but Urenna felt nothing. No remorse, no fear, just the hollow satisfaction of a debt finally called in. You have the right to remain silent. The officer backed, his grip rough on her shoulder. Urenna laughed. The sound erupted from somewhere deep in her chest, raw and bitter. I am not sorry, she said, her voice steady, despite the chaos around her. I will do it again if I had another chance. The officer's hand tightened. What did you say? Urenna turned her head, meeting his shocked gaze with eyes that burned brighter than the flames behind them. You heard me. They shoved her into the back of the police car, but even through the window, she could see people running toward the fire with buckets, their efforts futile against the inferno she had created. The woman, that woman, had escaped. She'd seen her fleeing figure disappear into the maze of narrow streets. But it didn't matter. The message had been sent. The silence had been broken. And somewhere, Urenna hoped her mother's spirit could finally know that someone had fought back. But to understand how a 22-year-old woman, with a quiet demeanor and gentle smile, could become an arsonist required going back. Back to before the fire, before the rage, before the truth shattered everything she thought she knew about her life. Urenna had always been her father's daughter. In a small developing community where zinc roofs caught rain like drums and red dirt roads turned to rivers during the wet season, she and her father had carved out a simple existence. Their house was modest, painted yellow once upon a time, now faded to something close to ochre. 3 rooms, a small veranda, where her father sat most evenings, and the compound they shared with 2 other families. Her father, Chidi, was a mechanic. His hands were perpetually stained with engine grease, and he smelled of motor oil and hard work. But those same rough hands had braided her hair when she was young, had checked her homework every night, had held her when nightmares came. He was both mother and father, and Urenna had never questioned it because she never had any reason to. Your mother was a good woman, he would say most times, usually late at night when he thought she was asleep. She wanted you so much, Urenna. You were her miracle. The story was simple, tragic, and final. Her mother had died during childbirth. Complications. One life exchanged for another. It was sad, but it happened. In their community, such stories were common enough. Urenna had grown up with the shadow of a mother she never knew. A ghost made of her father's occasional memories and a single photograph he kept by his bedside. A woman with kind eyes and a bright smile, frozen in time. She had learned to live with the absence. In fact, she had built her entire identity around it. She was the girl without a mother, the one her father had raised alone. The miracle baby who had cost her mother everything. It shaped how she moved through the world, careful and grateful, always conscious of the price that had to be paid for her existence. But secrets, as the saying goes, are like water put in a basket. That Thursday started like any other. Urenna was 22, working as a sales attendant in a small provision store at the edge of the market. She'd finished her secondary school education but couldn't afford university. So she worked, saved, and helped her father with bills. The job was monotonous, but it was honest and it kept food on their table. She left work at 6 as the sun began its descent and cast long shadows across the dusty roads. The walk home took 20 minutes, a route she knew so well she could navigate it with her eyes closed. Past the pepper seller who always called out greetings, past the compound where children played football with a ball made of plastic bags, past the house where old Mama Nkechi sold roasted plantain. It was in front of Mama Nkechi's house that Urenna heard the words that would change everything. "Auntie, good evening," she called out, smiling at the two women sitting on low stools in front of the house. They were neighbors, familiar faces, the kind of women who seemed to know everything about everyone. They smiled back, sweet as sugar. "Good evening, my dear. How is your father?" "He is well, ma. Greetings to you." She had already passed them, was already several steps away when she heard it. The voices weren't even lowered particularly, as if they had forgotten she was within earshot, or perhaps they simply didn't care. So till today, this girl no sabi how her mama take die. The other woman's response was quieter. But in the evening stillness, Urenna heard every word. I swear, Chidi never tell am the truth. That girl thinks say her mama died for childbirth. Ewo, the wickedness of that market woman, sha. How person go just kill another person like goat because of ordinary money? Urenna's feet stopped moving. She didn't make the decision to stop. Her body simply refused to take another step. The world around her continued its normal rhythm. Children were still shouting in the distance, someone's radio playing high life music, but she felt removed from it all, suspended in a moment that was stretching and stretching. And they just allow him to go free like that though. No justice, nothing. Nah, this life no balance at all. She almost froze, but didn't. That didn't stop the cold that crept up her spine and spread through her chest, turning her blood to ice water. Her hands began to tremble. She wanted to turn around, to march back to those women and demand they explain, but her legs wouldn't obey. Instead, she stood there, rooted to the spot, as her entire life, her entire world, tilted on its axis. How her mama take die? Ordinary money. Market woman. Kill another person like goats. The words circled her mind like vultures. She forced herself to move, to put one foot in front of the other, to walk the remaining distance to her house, even though her vision had gone blurry at the edges. She didn't remember the rest of the journey. One moment, she was standing in front of Mama Nkechi's house, and the next, she was pushing open the gate to their compound, moving like someone in a dream. Her father wasn't home yet. He often worked late, especially when he had a difficult repair job. Urenna sat on the veranda, still in her work clothes, and waited. The sun set. The sky turned purple, then black. Solar lights flickered on in neighboring compounds, and still she sat, the words playing over and over in her mind. When her father finally arrived, grease-stained and tired, she was ready. "Papa, how did my mother really die?" Chidi froze in the doorway, his worn work bag still hanging from his shoulder. In the dim light from their solar bulb, Urenna watched the color drain from his face. For a long moment, he said nothing. And in that silence, she knew. The women had been telling the truth. "Who told you?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Does it matter?" Something hard and brittle had settled in her tone. "Is it true? Did someone kill her?" Her father aged 10 years in 10 seconds. His shoulders slumped, the bag dropped to the floor, and he suddenly looked like an old man. He moved to the plastic chair across from her and sat heavily, his hands clasped between his knees. "I wanted to protect you," he said. "Tell me." It wasn't a request. So he did. And with every word, the daughter he had raised with such careful love slipped further away, replaced by someone harder, someone capable of things neither of them could have imagined. And that's just the beginning. If you're curious about what happens after this, subscribing keeps you right here for the rest of the story. Thank you for sticking around, dearest viewers. The story was this. Her mother, Adaku, had been a trader in the main market. She sold women's clothing, beautiful fabrics, and ready-made dresses. For 15 years, she and Chidi had tried for a child. 15 years of prayers, of traditional healers, of hospital visits, of hope deferred until it became a constant ache. And then finally, miraculously, Adaku had conceived. The pregnancy had been difficult, but Adaku had borne it with joy. Every discomfort was worth it. Every pain a small prize for the baby she had long awaited for. A baby she had waited so long to hold. She was 8 months pregnant when it happened. There was another trader in the market, a woman named Obiageli, who sold provisions. Adaku had borrowed money from her to expand her business. A significant sum, with the agreement to pay back in installments. But the pregnancy had slowed Adaku down. She couldn't walk as many hours, couldn't travel to buy new stock as frequently. The money she made decreased, and she fell behind on her payments. Obiageli was not a patient woman. She was known in the market for her sharp tongue and her hardened heart. When Adaku missed the third payment, Obiageli confronted her publicly in the market, shouting accusations of theft, calling her a fraudster, declaring that she had been cheated. Adaku, heavily pregnant and humiliated, had been kind and humble enough trying to explain why she had slowed down on the payments. She would pay. She promised, just give me time. The baby was coming soon, and once she recovered from childbirth, she would work twice as hard to repay every kobo. But Obiageli wasn't interested in explanations. She wanted her money, and she wanted it now. The argument escalated. A crowd gathered, as crowds always do when there's drama in the market. And then Obiageli did something unforgivable. She pushed Adako, a pregnant woman, 8 months heavy with child, pushed hard enough to see her stumbling backward into a table of goods. Adako fell, her swollen belly hitting the edge of the table before she crashed to the ground. The market went silent. Even Obiageli seemed shocked by what she'd done. But it was too late. The damage was done. Adako began bleeding. They rushed her to the hospital, but it was a small community hospital, under-equipped and understaffed. The doctors performed an emergency cesarean section. They saved the baby, a tiny girl with a strong cry. But Adako, weakened by the trauma and the blood loss, didn't survive the night. She had held her daughter once, just once. Take care of her, she whispered to Chidi, her voice fading. My miracle, my Urenna. And then she was gone. Chidi had been mad with grief. He'd wanted justice, wanted Obiageli arrested and persecuted. But justice, he quickly learns, was not for people like him. Obiageli had money and connections. She claimed it was an accident, that Odako had stumbled on her own. Witnesses were suddenly hard to find. Those who had been ready to testify changed their stories or disappeared. The police, likely paid off, showed no interest in pursuing the case. They told me to let it go, Chidi said, his voice breaking. They said I had a newborn daughter to think about. They said dragging it through the courts would take years and cost money I didn't have. They said even if we went to trial, nothing would come of it. He looked up at Urenna, his eyes wet. So I let it go. I took you home and I let it go. Urenna sat very still. Inside her chest, something was cracking. A fault line spreading through the foundation of everything she'd believed. Her mother hadn't died from some unavoidable medical complication. She had been murdered. There was no other word for it. Killed over a debt, pushed while pregnant, and left to bleed out her life on a hospital bed. And what? And the woman who did it was still alive, still free, still walking around somewhere as if she hadn't stolen a life, as if she hadn't orphaned a child, as if she hadn't committed murder. Where is she? Urenna's voice was calm. Too calm. This Obiageli. Where is she now? Chidi's head snapped up, alarm replacing grief on his face. Urenna, no. Where is she, Papa? She left the market years ago. I don't know where she is now, and it doesn't matter. Let the past stay in the past. But the past wasn't past. It was present, it was alive, and it demanded acknowledgement. Urenna stood up, her movements mechanical. I'm going to bed. Urenna, please. Don't let this poison you. Your mother wouldn't want that. She paused at the doorway to her room, not turning around. My mother is dead. We will never know what she would want. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something dark and terrible taking roots inside her. Justice hadn't been served. Her mother's death had gone unpunished. And the longer she thought about it, the more the rage built, layer upon layer, until it was a living thing inside her chest. The next morning, she called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Then, she began to investigate. Finding information in a small community was both difficult and easy. Difficult because people were protective of their own. Easy because everyone knew everything. Urenna started carefully, asking casual questions, piecing together the puzzle bit by bit. She learned that Obiageli had indeed left the market several years ago. Business had been good to her. Her provision store had grown, and she had eventually moved to a better location. She'd also married. A late-in-life marriage to a widower with grown children. They lived in a modest house in a newer part of town, about 3 miles from where Urenna and her father lived. Urenna found the house 1 week after learning the truth. She took a bus across town, asking directions until she stood across the street from a small white painted house with a low fence and a mango tree in the compound. Her heart hammered as she watched the door, waiting. When Obiageli finally emerged, Urenna almost didn't breathe. She was older now, her hair gone grey, her body thickened by age and comfortable living. She moved slowly, locking her door before walking down the street with a shopping bag over her shoulder. This was the woman. This unremarkable, ordinary-looking woman had killed her mother. Urenna followed her at a distance, watching as she stopped at a pharmacy, then a fabric store, then bought vegetables from a roadside seller. She watched the woman smile and bargain, laugh at something the vegetable seller said, living her life as if she had every right to it. The darkness inside Urenna expanded. She returned home that day and acted normal. She went back to work, smiled at customers, helped her father with dinner. But every night, she lay awake, thinking, planning. The rage had crystallized into something colder, more purposeful. If the law wouldn't give her justice, she would take it herself. But what did justice look like? She couldn't kill the woman, could she? The thought had crossed her mind in the darkest hours of night. But she'd pushed it away. She wasn't a murderer. But what was she? What had she become in the weeks since learning the truth? She started visiting the house regularly, learning Obiageli's patterns. The woman lived a quiet life. Her husband was often away, visiting his children in another state. She attended church on Sundays, went to the market twice a week, hosted a prayer group every Thursday evening. It was during one of those surveillance sessions that Urenna overheard something that made her decision for her. She was sitting at a nearby mama put, pretending to wait while watching the house, when she heard Obiageli talking to a neighbor over the fence. "God has been good to me," Obiageli was saying, her voice carrying across the quiet street. "Despite all the troubles in my past, He has blessed me with a good life." Troubles. She called killing someone troubles. "You deserve it, my sister," the neighbor replied. "You're a good woman." Urenna's hand tightened around her spoon. A good woman. This murderer was considered a good woman. She went to church, prayed with her neighbors, lived comfortably, while Adaku laid in the ground, while Chidi walked himself to exhaustion, while Urenna had grown up without a mother. That night, Urenna made her final decision. She would burn the house down, burn it to the ground, destroy this comfortable life that had been built on her mother's grave. She would wait until the husband was away, would make sure Obiageli was home. She would make her feel fear before she died. The way Adaku must have felt fear as she bled out on that hospital bed. The planning took 2 more weeks. She needed to be smart about it. She needed to make sure she wouldn't be immediately caught. She bought petrol in small quantities from different places, storing the containers in an abandoned building near the market. She studied the house layout, noting that it was mostly wood and old materials that would burn easily. She waited until she confirmed the husband had traveled, would be gone for at least a week. The night she chose was a Friday. The street was usually quiet on Friday nights, most people staying in after the long week. There was no moon, the darkness thick and complete. Urenna told her father she was going to an all-night prayer vigil with a friend. Something she'd done before. Of course, Chidi didn't question it. She dressed in dark clothes, moved through the streets like a shadow. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. But her hands were steady. The containers of kerosene were heavy, but determination made her strong. When she reached the house, all the lights were off, except one window. Probably Obiageli's bedroom. Good. The woman was home. Urenna's conscience whispered that this was wrong, that this was murder, that she would be no better than Obiageli herself. But she crushed that voice beneath the weight of her rage. She poured the diesel around the base of the house, the acrid smell filling her nostrils. The wooden walls drank it in greedily. She walked quickly, efficiently, circling the entire structure until all the containers were empty. Then she pulled out the matches. Her hand shook for the first time as she struck the match. The tiny flame seemed impossibly bright in the darkness. This was it, the moment of no return. Once she threw this match, she would become an arsonist, a criminal, possibly a murderer. The match burned down towards her fingers. She thought of her father, of the photograph of her mother by his bedside, of the life she could have had if Obiageli had just been patient, if she hadn't pushed, if she had showed mercy. Urenna threw the match. The fire caught immediately, racing along the trail of kerosene with hungry enthusiasm. Flames leaped up the walls, crawling across the wood like living creatures. The heat hit her face, intense and immediate, and she had to step back. Inside the house, she heard a scream. For a moment, just a moment, Urenna hesitated. The voice of another human being in terror cut through her rage like a knife. What was she doing? But then, she remembered her mother's face in the photograph. Remembered that she had died in fear too. Died in pain. Died knowing she would never have held her baby again. The front door burst open. Obiageli stumbled out, coughing, her nightgown singed, her eyes wild with panic. She saw Urenna standing there, illuminated by the flames, and their eyes met. Recognition flickered across Obiageli's face. You're Chidi's daughter. I'm Adaku's daughter, Urenna said coldly. The baby she was carrying when you killed her. Obiageli's face went white. I didn't. It was an accident. You pushed a pregnant woman, you murdered my mother, and you walked free. The house was fully engulfed now. Flames shooting from the windows. The roof beginning to collapse. The heat was tremendous. Neighbors were emerging from their houses, voices raised in alarm. Obiageli turned to run, but stumbled. Urenna could have helped her, could have shown the mercy this woman had never shown her mother. Instead, she stood there and watched as Obiageli scrambled to her feet and fled down the street, her nightgown flapping around her legs. Someone was shouting about calling the police. Someone else ran towards them with a bucket of water, futile against the inferno. And Urenna just stood there, watching the house burn, feeling the heat against her skin, and experiencing something she couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction, Not happiness, just a grim sense of completion. The police arrived 15 minutes later, their sirens wailing through the night. By then, someone had pointed at Urenna, had told them she had been standing there since the beginning, that she was the one who set the fire. She didn't deny it. She didn't run. She just stood there watching the flames until they grabbed her and forced her to the ground. That was how she ended up here, wrist bound, pressed against the hood of a police car, saying words that would seal her fate. I am not sorry. I would do it again if I had another chance. They took her to the station and threw her into a cell. The concrete was cold and the air smelled of urine and despair, but Urenna barely noticed. She sat on the thin mattress and stared at the wall, replaying everything in her mind. Her father arrived at dawn. She heard him before she saw him. His voice raised and desperate, demanding to see his daughter. When they finally brought him to her cell, the look on his face nearly broke through her armor. Urenna, he gripped the bars. What have you done? What you should have done 22 years ago. I told you to let it go. I told you let her get away with murder. The words exploded from her. You just accepted it. You let that woman walk free while Mama's body was still warm. Chidi's face crumpled. What did you want me to do? I had a newborn baby. No money. No connections. The system was rigged against us from the start. So you did nothing. You told me she died on childbirth. You lied to me for 22 years. To protect you. To let you have a normal life without this poison inside you. He gestured at the cell around her. And look what knowing the truth has done. Look where you are. Urenna turned away from him, her throat tight. At least I did something. At least I made her pay. At what cost? His voice broke. Urenna, you could go to prison for years. You could be charged with attempted murder. Was it worth it? Is this what your mother would have wanted? Don't you dare. She whispered. Don't you dare ask me what she would have wanted. She's dead. She's been dead my entire life because of that woman. The silence stretched between them, heavy with grief and regret, and love twisted into something painful. Finally, Chidi spoke again. His voice was small and defeated. I've hired a lawyer, Mr. Okafor from the church. He says we'll argue temporary insanity, that you will overcome by grief when you learn the truth. I'm not insane. Then what are you? He looked at her with tears streaming down his face. Because the daughter I raised would never do this. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Urenna felt something crack inside her chest. And suddenly, she was crying too. Great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. She had been strong for too long. Her father reached through the bars, and she grasped his hands. And they stood there together, both of them, broken by the same tragedy, in different ways. The days that followed blurred together. The lawyer came, a tired-looking man with kind eyes who listened to her story and shook his head sadly. "This is complicated," he said. "Very complicated." Obiageli had filed charges: attempted murder, arson, destruction of property. But word had spread why Urenna had done it, and public opinion was divided. Some said she was a monster who deserved to rot in jail. Others said she was a daughter seeking justice that the system had denied. The case became something of a sensation in their community. People took sides. Urenna's old neighbors started a petition demanding that Obiageli's role in Adaku's death be investigated. Someone dug up old witnesses from the markets, people who had seen the push, who had been afraid to speak up 22 years ago but were willing to speak now. But none of it changed the fundamental facts. Urenna had burnt down the house with a person inside it. Whatever Obiageli had done in the past, Urenna had become a criminal herself. The preliminary hearing was held 3 weeks after her arrest. Urenna was led to the courtroom in handcuffs, her hair unkempt, dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights in the cell. The room was packed. She saw her father in the front row, looking like he aged a decade. She saw former customers from the store where she worked. She saw people who she didn't recognize, drawn by the drama of it all. And there, on the other side of the courtroom, she saw her. She saw Obiageli. The woman looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her lawyer sat beside her, a sharp-suited man who looked expensive. When their eyes met, Obiageli quickly looked away, but not before Urenna saw something there. Fear? Guilt? It didn't matter. How could it matter? The damage was done. Both of them were trapped in this now, linked forever by tragedy and vengeance. The prosecutor laid out the case against her. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses had seen her at the scene. She had confessed to the police. The kerosene and diesel containers bore her fingerprints. There were no question of guilt, only of degree. Then Mr. Okafor stood to speak. He was not an eloquent man, but he spoke from the heart. He told Adaku's story, told of a young woman who had waited 15 years for a child, only to be killed by a creditor's impatience. He spoke of a system that had failed to deliver justice, that had let a killer walk free because she had money and connections. My client is not a criminal, he said. She is a daughter who learned that her mother was murdered and that the murderer faced no consequences. She is a young woman who was driven to desperation by a system that failed her family. Yes, what she did was wrong. But we must ask ourselves, what drives a peaceful, law-abiding young woman to such an extreme act? The answer is simple: the failure of justice. It was a good argument, But Urenna could see it wasn't enough. The judge's face remained impassive. The prosecutor objected, arguing that vigilante justice could not be tolerated, that Urenna's actions were premeditated and dangerous. The hearing ended with Urenna being remanded in custody pending trial. As they led her from the courtroom, she caught her father's eye. He was crying again, and the sight of his tears did something to her that all the cell time and legal proceedings hadn't managed. It made her wonder, for the first time, if she had actually been wrong. Back in her cell, Urenna lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. She thought about her mother, about the photograph she'd looked at countless times growing up. In that picture, Adako was smiling, her eyes bright with joy. Would she really have wanted this? Would she have wanted her daughter to throw away her life for revenge? But what else could Urenna have done? Just accepted it? Moved on as if her mother's death meant nothing? She didn't have answers. Only questions that circled endlessly in her mind. The trial was set for 2 months later, but strange things began happening before it could proceed. First, one of the old witnesses from the market came forward with a detailed statement about what had happened 22 years ago. Then another, and another. People who had been silent for decades suddenly found their voices, perhaps moved by Urenna's desperate act, perhaps simply tired of carrying the secret. The old case was reopened, not officially, not in any legal sense, but in the court of a public opinion. Journalists picked up the story. A local radio station did a segment on justice delayed. Someone started a social media campaign, though Urenna wouldn't learn about that until much later. Pressure mounted on Obiageli. People began recognizing her, pointing and whispering. Someone spray-painted "murderer" in capital letters on what remained of her burnt house. Her husband, when he returned and learned what had happened, left her. He wanted no part of the controversy, the scandal, the past catching up. Obiageli's lawyer approached Mr. Okafor with a proposition. If Urenna would agree to plead guilty to a lesser charge, if she would apologize and show remorse, Obiageli would agree not to pursue the most serious charges. It was a way out, a compromise that might see Urenna serve a few years instead of decades. Mr. Okafor brought the offer to Urenna. They sat across from each other in the small consultation room at the jail, and he explained it carefully. "This is a good deal," he said. "It might not be the best we can hope for. She wants me to apologize. Yes, to show remorse for the arson." Urenna laughed. That same bitter laugh from the night of the fire. "Tell her no. Urenna, please, think about this. You could be out in 3, maybe 4 years with good behavior. you'd still have a life ahead of you. But if we go to trial and lose, you could get 10 years, maybe more. I told the police the truth that night. I'm not sorry. I would do it again. Mr. Okafor sighed heavily. I understand you are angry. But anger won't keep you warm in a prison cell. Anger won't give you back the years you will lose. My mother lost all her years. She lost the chance to raise me, to see me grow up, to have a life, to become somebody. Why should I compromise with the woman who took that from her? Because you are alive and she's dead. And throwing away your life won't bring her back. The words hung in the air between them. Mr. Okafor looked like he regretted the harshness of his tone. But he didn't take it back. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice softer. Your father is outside. He comes every day, you know. Sits in the waiting area for hours, just hoping to see you for a few minutes. He has already lost your mother. Don't make him lose you too. That night, for the first time since the fire, Urenna allowed herself to really think about her father, about what this was doing to him. He had carried the grief of Adaku's death for 22 years, had raised a daughter alone, had built a life from the ruins of his tragedy. And now he was watching his daughter destroy herself from the inside out. Was this justice? Or was it just pain? More destruction? More lives ruined? She requested to see him the next day. When they brought Chidi to the consultation room, he looked so hopeful it broke her heart. The lawyer said you might take the deal, he said immediately. Is it true? I don't know, Papa. She took his hands. Tell me honestly, what should I do? He was quiet for a long time, his thumbs rubbing circles on the back of her hands. Finally, he spoke. I've been thinking a lot about your mother lately. About who she was as a person. Tell me about her. She was kind, sometimes too kind. People would take advantage of her generosity, and I'd get angry. But she would just laugh and say that kindness was never wasted. His eyes were distant, lost in memory. When we were trying for a baby, those 15 years, she never became bitter. I never saw my wife blame God or fate. She just kept hoping, kept believing. Sometimes I wondered, was she real? Papa, let me finish. When she found out she was pregnant with you, she was so happy. Happier than I'd ever seen her. And you know what she said? She said, our daughter is going to be a light in this world. She's going to be better than us, kinder than us. She's going to matter. He looked up at Urenna, his eyes wet. She didn't want vengeance. She wanted you to be light. The words settled over Urenna like a heavy blanket. But what Obiageli did was evil, was wrong, was unjust. Chidi's voice was firm. But Urenna, my dear daughter, you burning down her house didn't undo any of that. Your mother is still gone. Obiageli is still a woman who killed someone. And now, you're here, in jail. And I'm losing you too. I think I'm losing myself more. I just wanted her to pay. And she has. Maybe not in the way you wanted, but she has. Everyone knows now what she did. Her husband left her. She has nothing. No house, no family, no peace. The whole community knows she's a murderer. Isn't that something, Urenna? Was it? Urenna wasn't sure. But she was tired. So tired of the anger, of the rage that had consumed her, of the darkness that had taken root in her heart. If I take the deal, if I apologize, it feels like I'm saying what I did was wrong. It was wrong, Chidi said gently. Not the feeling, of course, not the anger, not the desire for justice, but the action, burning down that house with her in it, that was wrong. You, my daughter, know it was wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right, Urenna. Your mother's death was a tragedy. You going to prison for half your life would be another tragedy. Don't let Obiageli destroy both of you. She destroyed your mom once, and you are giving her the power to destroy you too. That conversation stayed with Urenna for days. She thought about her mother, about the woman in the photograph who had wanted her daughter to be light in the world. She thought about her father, growing old while waiting for her outside a jail. She thought about her own life, the years stretching ahead of her, and what she wanted them to mean. She thought about revenge and justice, and whether they were really the same thing. A week before the trial was set to begin, Urenna told Mr. Okafor she would take the deal. The relief on his face was palpable. "You're making the right choice," he assured her. She wasn't sure about that, but she was sure she didn't want to spend the next decade in a cell, feeding the darkness inside her until there was nothing else left. The arrangement was made. Urenna would plead guilty to arson and destruction of property. In exchange, Obiageli would drop the attempted murder charge. The prosecutor recommended a sentence of 4 years with the possibility of parole after 2. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was packed again. But this time, when Urenna stood before the judge, she didn't feel the cold rage that had sustained her. She felt tired, sad, and strangely empty. "Do you have anything to say?" the judge asked. Urenna looked at Obiageli, sitting rigid in her seat. Then she looked at her father. Then she looked at the judge. I'm not going to say that what I did was right. It wasn't. Setting that fire was wrong, and I accept responsibility for it. But I want everyone in this room to know why I did it. She told her mother's story, told it clearly, without embellishment, without dramatics. Just the facts of a young woman who had waited 15 years for a child, only to be killed by someone's impatience and cruelty. She spoke about growing up without a mother, about learning the truth, about the rage that had driven her to that terrible night. I wanted justice, she said. But justice should come from the law, from courts and judges, not from anger and fire. I understand that now. So yes, I'm sorry for what I did. But I'm not sorry for wanting the world to know what happened to my mother. She deserved better. She deserved justice. And I hope that even though I went about it the wrong way, at least now people know the truth about Adaku and about what was taken from her. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even the judge seemed moved, though his expression remained professionally neutral. He delivered the sentence as agreed, 4 years with the possibility of parole, and then added something unexpected. I wanted to say that while I cannot condone your actions, I can understand the pain that drove them. Our justice system failed your family 22 years ago, and that failure led directly to this tragedy. I hope that this case serves as a reminder that justice delayed is not just an inconvenience, it's a wound that festers and spreads. May you find peace, Miss Urenna, and may your mother's memory be a blessing. They took her back to her cell, but something had shifted. The darkness inside her, that terrible rage, had loosened its grip. It was still there. She could feel it, but it no longer controlled her. In its place was grief, pure and clean, the grief she should have allowed to feel from the beginning. That night, Urenna cried for her mother for the first time. Not angry tears, not bitter tears, but the tears of a daughter mourning a mother she never got to know. She cried for the life Adaku should have had, for the moments they should have shared, for all the love that had been stolen by one moment of violence. And somewhere, in that grief, she found something unexpected. A tiny spark of her mother's kindness, buried beneath all the anger. A whisper of the woman Adaku had wanted her to be. A light, however small, however damaged, still flickering in the darkness. Prison was hard. The days were long and monotonous, the nights longer still, but Urenna used the time. She read everything she could get her hands on. She took correspondence courses. She wrote letters to her father, long letters where she talked about her mother, asked questions about her life, tried to build a relationship with a ghost. And slowly, over months, and then years, she began to understand something. Her mother's story didn't have to end with tragedy. It could continue through Urenna, through the choices she made, through the person she decided to become. 2 years into her sentence, Urenna was granted parole. She walked out of the prison into blinding sunlight, and there was her father, older and grayer, but smiling wider than she'd seen in years. They held each other for a long time, not speaking, just holding on. "Welcome home," he finally said. Home was still the same yellow house, the same small community, but Urenna saw it differently now. She saw the women who had gossiped that Thursday evening, the ones whose careless words had changed her life. She saw Mama Nkechi's house, where she'd learned the truth. She saw all of it with eyes that had learned the hard way, that you couldn't burn down the past. She got a job, not in a store this time, but in a local organization that helped women in the markets organize and protect themselves. She found purpose in helping others avoid what had happened to her mother. She spoke at community meetings about the importance of proper contracts, of legal protections, of not taking matters into your own hands. People whispered about her, of course. The girl who had burned down a house, the arsonist, the daughter who had sought revenge. Let them whisper. She knew who she was now, and she knew who she wanted to be. One day, about 6 months after her release, Urenna was at the market when she saw Obiageli. The woman was older, smaller, shopping alone with a worn bag. Their eyes met across the crowded market, and for a moment, time stopped. Urenna felt the old anger stare, but it was distant now, muted. She could look at Obiageli and see not a monster, but a woman who had made a terrible choice 20 years ago and was still living with the consequences. She could see someone who had lost everything, just as Urenna had, just as Chidi had, just as Adaku had. There were no winners in this story, only survivors. Obiageli's eyes widened with fear, and she turned to hurry away. Urenna let her go. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to do. The debts had been paid in suffering, in loss, in shattered lives. Adding more pain wouldn't balance the scales. That evening, Urenna sat with her father on the small veranda, watching the sun set over their community. She held the photograph of her mother, studying the woman's smile, her bright eyes, her joy. "Do you think she would be proud of me?" Urenna asked after everything. Chidi was quiet for a moment. "I think she'd be proud that you survived, that you found your way back from the darkness, that you are here, alive, trying to do better." "I wasted so much time on anger." "Not wasted per se. You needed to feel it, to walk through it. The tragedy is when people get stuck there, when the anger becomes all they are. But you didn't. You're still my daughter. You're still Adaku's miracle." Urenna leaned against her father's shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned purple and gold. She thought about her mother, about the life she had and the life she had lost. She thought about justice and revenge and forgiveness. She thought about the fire and the darkness and the long road back to light. And she thought about the future, about the daughter Adaku had dreamed of, the one who was supposed to be a light in the world. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Maybe, despite everything, despite the mistakes and the prison time and the anger, she could still become that person. Maybe she could honor her mother, not through vengeance, but through kindness, through helping others, through being the best version of herself she could be. It wouldn't undo the past. Nothing could. Her mother was still gone, still robbed of the life she should have had. But perhaps the best revenge against tragedy wasn't more tragedy. Perhaps it was choosing to live well, to be good, to matter. As darkness fell over their community, Urenna made a promise to the mother she'd never known. She would try. She would stumble and fall and get back up and try again. She would carry Adaku's memory not as a weight, but as a light guiding her forward. The past was written, but the future was still a blank page, waiting for Urenna to decide what story she would write there. If this story moved you, if it made you think about justice and revenge and forgiveness, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in Urenna's position. Would you have sought revenge? Would you have let it go? Your perspective matters, and I read every single comment. And if you want more stories like this, stories that dig deep into the human heart and don't shy away from difficult questions, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message about anger and healing. Like this video if it resonated with you. And remember, we all carry pain, but we get to choose whether that pain destroys us or transforms us. Choose wisely. Until the next story, take care of yourselves and each other.